Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining us for today's virtual CTE discussion. Today's discussion is on delivering jaw-dropping presentations. How can educators use the techniques used on the TED stage to create and deliver jaw-dropping presentations that the audience will remember and act upon? This session will provide you with the tools to transform your next speaking engagement, whether presenting to students, board members, educators, parents, or community members. Today's discussion is hosted by Rachel Mann, a former high school career and technical education teacher with 14 years of classroom experience. Since leaving the classroom, she has served as the director of Educators Rising at the Arizona Department of Education and as the Network to Transform Teaching State Director through Northern Arizona University. She is a former CTE fellow and serves as a fellow for the Association for Career and Technical Education Arizona and serves on the board for the National Council of Local Administrators. Rachel is the founder of #TeachLikeTED, which assists educators in applying the principles of TED Talks to leadership and in the classroom. She presents at conferences across the country on how to lead like TED and how to transform the lives of students by sharing ideas in a TED-style fashion. Rachel also speaks to student groups and trains them in leadership, presentation literacy, global collaboration, and communication skills. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel.
All right, thanks so much, Kate. I appreciate that introduction and appreciate you guys being here today. And I'm really excited to share this message with you guys on how to create really dynamic presentations and be able to share ideas in a TED-style fashion. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint here. All right. So again, the presentation today is create and deliver jaw-dropping presentations. And my contact information is here. Please feel free to email me or connect with me on social media. I would love to keep the conversation going outside of today's webinar. And if there are things that come up or ideas you want to share, feel free to share those and use the hashtag #LeadLikeTED or TeachLikeTED. So TED Talks, TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And the whole point of the TED organization is to share ideas in effective ways. And folks who are invited to present on the TED stage, it's their opportunity to give the talk of a lifetime. So usually the talks are between 3 to 18 minutes. And it's just an idea that they feel will make an impact on society or the people around them, or just a new and an innovative idea. But it's ideas that are worthy of spreading that other folks can appreciate and benefit from and can eventually change the way that they think about a certain topic. Why teach like TED? A lot of people will say, well, why would you want to incorporate this in the classroom or in presentations? It's someone speaking at you, and those days of lecturing are gone. However, TED Talks are based on brain science. The reason that a TED Talk is a certain length of time is based upon how long folks can hold attention. And there's ways to incorporate these skills and this methodology that's very effective in the classroom, at a board meeting, whether it's talking to a parent-teacher conference, or even if you're doing a TEDx event or a TED Club event, whatever it may be. These are great skills to have and really engage your audience in an effective way. When someone is invited to the main TED stage, they used to send them this stone tablet that was literally engraved with 10 commandments. These commandments have transformed since that original time. They have a new set. But as I started learning more about TED, reading some TED books, training students in public speaking, I started looking at ways to incorporate this in the classroom and came up with a new list of TED commandments, which, to be honest, it keeps evolving as I learn more about TED and learn more about presentation skills. But some of the the commandments that I will share with you today are based off of these TED commandments. And the first one is paint a mental picture. So when you think about creating and delivering a dynamic presentation, well, you want to create your content first, but when it comes down to thinking through how you want to present your presentation, you want to be able to really create a mental picture to connect with your audience. Research shows that pictures are 6 times more likely to be remembered than just text, which is pretty fascinating when you think about how much text we use in our presentations and in teaching. So incorporating pictures and visuals is really powerful in your presentations. I was meeting with Wirebuzz, with the founder of Wirebuzz, Todd Hartley, on Friday, and he gave me some interesting statistics as well about videos and incorporating videos into your presentations. And he was saying that that people, when you're presenting through social media or sharing ideas through social media, people are 4 times likely to view a video over images. They process the input through video 60,000 times faster. And we remember 68% more of video versus 11% when we're just reading text. So the way that we communicate is really changing as a society as we become more and more global. And when you think about TED Talks and how the videos are uploaded, it's really a great tool to incorporate into your presentations. There's some that are very short that you can throw in, and as educators, we're allowed to use those. And TED actually wants you to use those. So it's a way to just kind of emphasize ideas. As a classroom teacher, I taught culinary arts, and for every lesson that was outside of a lab day, I always had a PowerPoint. And as I go back through some of those PowerPoints on SlideShare, it's terrifying to think about some of the skills that I did not know in the classroom and just how many words I'd put on the screen. Everything had bullet points. It was my way of keeping track of what I was going to say as an educator. I would have everything in line so I'd remember what my lesson was. And I've learned a lot since then on presentations and how to use them more effectively. One of the things that I have learned, and this is a quote by Akash Karia in his book on how to deliver an effective TED Talk, is that you shouldn't have something on a slide that you're saying verbally. So if you and your slide are saying the same thing, which I'm illustrating right now, one of you is not needed. So we've all been to meetings, conferences where the presentations are very slide heavy, very word heavy, and that's not the most effective tool. Sometimes when we're reading from the slide, our audience is reading ahead of us, and so we're actually becoming less effective because they're not listening to your words. If you throw in something that's not on the slide, they're not hearing that. The only thing that they're getting is what they're reading ahead, and it's very easy to lose your audience when presenting in that manner. Bullet points kill. If you notice when you're watching a TED Talk, it's very rare. I don't think I've ever seen a presentation that had bullet points. Maybe if it was a TEDx one, but for the most part, you learn when you're preparing for the TED stage not to use bullet points. And there's a reason for that. You want to focus on one idea at a time. And when you have a list of bullet points and facts, you're not focusing on one idea. There's no limit to the amount of slides that you can have in a presentation. So why would you have a lot of bullet points when you could really focus on having one slide for each idea and using lots of strong imagery? When you are using words, such as this beautiful quote by Nancy Duarte, when you're using words, adding an image is going to cause your audience to remember it and process it in a much richer way. So for instance, for this quote, we could add an image that really shows that groundswell and makes you really connect the idea of an idea. You have the light bulbs, all of this energy that's happening, and it helps you to connect that idea to the image that you're looking at. And then here's another example. This is one of my favorite quotes by Joseph Campbell, and it's a beautiful quote on its own, but when you add a picture to it, it just really intensifies the likelihood that the person is going to remember what you're saying. And it gives that connection because you're using different areas of the brain to connect the words to the image. There are tons of apps that you can use to create really strong images with your presentations. One of my favorites is WordSwag. Almost every slide that you're seeing today is a WordSwag slide. You're able to use pictures that are already available, that are common, that anyone's allowed to use the pictures, or you can even add words to your own slides, or just use the images themselves through this app. For videos, a couple of my favorites are TubeChop and then the YouTube Downloader, which if we have time towards the end, I can show you how to use that to embed videos into your presentations. One thing that I sometimes see happen is when someone is using a video clip, if they're trying to pull it from the internet, if you have a bad connection or if anything happens with technology, you're going to have problems and it's going to interrupt your flow. So by already having just a portion of your video, instead of trying to find where you want to be at, what point you want to be at on a video during your presentation, you're just able to have a much smoother presentation that folks can really pay attention to and learn from without having those interruptions. And then also painting a mental picture with no images at all. I was training someone for a TEDx, I was coaching someone for their TEDx presentation yesterday, and we were talking about whether to use images or just to really use those strong words and descriptions. Because when you create a mental picture, when you're able to describe something so richly that someone creates a mental picture, your brain processes it the same as if you did have a picture there. So it's that richly ingrained. So just deciding if you want to use pictures, or if you want to use pictures, make sure it's as a backdrop, not as the main part of your presentation. The words that you're saying should be the main part of your presentation. And then the jaw-dropping piece. When the jaw drops, that's when you have the person exactly where you want them. They're in full receiving mode. Their mind is ready to be filled. There's a knowledge gap, as Chris Anderson would say. He's the curator of TED Talks. He talks about how there's a knowledge gap that happens, and you want to fill it with more information. So some of the ways that you can create that knowledge gap is by creating a strong emotional connection. And one of the examples that I've heard before that I love is on 9/11. Everyone remembers where they were at. If you're alive during that time. I was working with a group of high school students over the weekend, and some of them weren't born yet. But for most of us as educators, we remember that very vividly, exactly where we were at, what we were doing, but then we may not remember what we had for breakfast a few days ago, or we lose our keys when we just had them an hour ago. And it's because anything that has an emotional connection is something that you're going to remember much more vividly. So how can you create that emotional connection with your audience through different emotions? Something that, an example would be when Bill Gates was presenting on malaria. He realized that malaria wasn't something that impacts people in the United States, so he decided he had to come up with something that was really jaw-dropping in order to get the attention. So he had a jar with him as he started talking about malaria, and he said, you know, malaria doesn't affect people in the United States, so I brought some here with me. It shouldn't only be poor people that have this experience. He twists off the top of the lid and says, let them swarm around a little bit. And the folks in the audience started roaring. People started tweeting out about how they're not going to sit in the front row anymore. And the talk went viral. And it actually ended up causing a lot of people to donate money to the cause of researching malaria, because it was so vivid and so richly ingrained that they could connect to a subject that they otherwise wouldn't connect to. Nicolove Merchant, she did a talk, and it was called Have a Meeting, Take a Walk. And she started off her presentation by pointing at the audience and saying, what you're doing right now is killing you. And then she went on to tell people how sitting is the smoking of the 21st century. And by creating that strong analogy to where someone's sitting in the audience thinking, what could I possibly be doing that's killing me? I'm sitting at a conference or sitting on my couch watching this video of this talk. It was a jaw-dropping moment where they wanted to know more. I was taking a health class in college, and I remember my professor, I went to Liberty University, a Baptist school, and my professor in my health class pulls out a cigarette and starts smoking a cigarette during class. He took a couple of puffs, and then he took a tissue, breathed through the tissue, and showed us that there was no residue. He then continued to teach and talking about how harmful smoking was as he's smoking a cigarette. And when he got about halfway through the cigarette, he did the same thing again. And he inhaled and then he exhaled through the tissue. And we're able to see the brown circle and the tar. And it left such a vivid image. And it was just so connected to that class. I seriously doubt that anyone that was in his class ever smoked. It was just such a strong imagery that why would anyone want to do that to their body? So it really stuck with the audience. Joe Gebbia, who is the founder of Airbnb, he was presenting and talking about his company and how he had a really difficult time at first getting folks to trust, to invite people into their home, into the most intimate parts of their lives, and how he had to overcome that barrier in order to make Airbnb a success. In order to get the audience to really connect with this aspect, he asked the audience if they wanted to do a 30-second experiment. They, of course, obliged. And he pulled out his cell phone and he held it up and he told everyone to pull up their devices. Everyone pulled up their devices. He then told them to unlock their devices and hold them up again, and then said to pass them to the person to the left of them. Well, the whole audience sitting next to strangers, they just start laughing. Just that sense of fear, even if there's nothing private or anything that you have to hide. Just it's a very intimate part of our lives. We put everything on our cell phones, and that was his way of making people really get what he was talking about through that experiment that he did with the audience. It was quick and it was effective. Going back to when I was a culinary arts teacher, the subject that the students did not want to learn, and it was the first subject that I had to teach during the school year, was about safety and sanitation. So I had to figure out a way to make kids really want to learn the information. And I was on the Center for Disease Control website and noticed that when they were preparing folks for emergency preparedness, they were using an analogy of a zombie apocalypse. So I decided to try that in my 2 weeks of safety and sanitation at the beginning of the school year. And we had to submit our lesson plans to our principal. So my principal was the first person sitting in the chair that day before any of the students got there. And he looked at me just like, I've got to know where you're going with this. But the kids really enjoyed it because it gave a new spin. It was something that they weren't expecting, and they wanted to know what it was about. Another part of safety and sanitation that I noticed on end of program assessments, students were missing the questions on what are the symptoms of different foodborne illnesses. So as I was teaching, I found this image and I incorporated that in my PowerPoint, and there wasn't a single student who missed that question that year. So sometimes disgust can be that emotional connection, that jaw-dropping moment that really gets the people to pay attention and to listen to what you're saying. Another presentation that I did recently, it was for Northern Arizona University for their teacher preparation program. I was doing a presentation on creating your professional brand through social media. And my boss, who had asked me to do this presentation, she told me it was April 1st, and I warned her ahead of time that if I'm presenting on April 1st, there's going to be something that's going to happen along with April Fools. So as I was talking to the students about social media, I had this slide on the board after my introduction and said, and this is the picture that was posted on Facebook that caused me to lose my job as a teacher. The kids were shocked. Some of them stopped breathing for a moment. And then I went on to the next slide and said, April Fools. However, that picture could have gotten me fired. I then went back to the picture and showed them that there was a lid on the bottle and that I was using it to make it was for Thanksgiving and it was for a pecan pie, but it got their attention, and they were paying attention from that point on and really thinking about their identity and the pictures that they post and how it could impact their reputation as an educator. Another way to really engage emotionally with your audience is to talk about things that you're passionate about. So really not being afraid of holding back, but revealing what you're passionate about and how much you care about what you're saying. So thinking about what inspires you. For secondary teachers, sometimes we love our content, but I think most of us are really inspired by our students. And that is something we have to remind ourselves every day when we go in the classroom, what our inspiration is and why we do what we do. And I think a lot of times that changes the dynamics of how we present to our students when we really have that passion and that inspiration. I think when we go to talk to advocate for our subject areas, if we go to talk to legislators, thinking about that inspiration could be what helps you to overcome the fear that you may have of speaking, but just to really give something that's jaw-dropping. In Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe talks about passion, and he says to take your passion with you. When you think about career and technical education, some of those jobs can be very dirty jobs, and that's what his whole show is about. And he says that sometimes it's not about following your passion, but taking your passion with you into whatever you do. So if you are working in a welding situation, really thinking about why you're doing it, how you're helping, why you're there, can change your perspective and how you do your work. And I think too, even with speaking, with creating dynamic presentations, remembering why we're there can be very powerful. One of my favorite principles for delivering a TED Talk and for delivering presentations is remembering all the while that laughter is good. Lightening up and really incorporating humor in our presentations. We have a lot of different standards that we have to teach and material to cover, and making learning fun is so important, and students learn more when they're having fun. Employees perform better when they're having fun and when they're happy to be in your class or happy to be in your school or in your work, whatever it may be. I can't help but think about teaching sixth grade. When I first moved to Arizona, I was trying to find a CTE job, but it was right after the economy had taken a dip and there was a shortage of teachers. So I was doing a long-term sub position for sixth grade science. And I remember calling my mom, who was my mentor. She had taught for many years and was a school improvement coach, and just telling her just how awful this position was, and the problems with my students. And she stopped me in the middle of my conversation and she said, Rachel, how often do you smile at your students? And I stopped for a minute and I said, Mom, if you knew these students, you would know there is nothing to smile about. And looking back on that, I find that humorous because it was such an important lesson for me as an educator. And I think we can all relate to that at some point. But she told me, she said, if your students do not learn a single thing for the rest of this week, that's fine. I want your focus to be on smiling at every student every day. So I started doing that every day, smiling at every student. It completely changed the dynamics of my classroom, and those students started learning. It caused us to have a relationship to where they wanted to learn, they wanted to hear what I was saying. Those relationships matter, and incorporating humor, lightening up in the classroom is one of the ways to really build relationships, whether it's in the workplace or in the classroom. Even if you think about going into a business or a school, and the first person that you see really sets the tone because our emotions are contagious. If you go into a store and the first person you meet says, what do you want? or has a very rude demeanor, that's going to change your day. It may even change the way that you interact with someone else. And as educators, we have to think about how our emotions impact the people around us and how those emotions are going to carry out through the rest of their day. Steve Jobs was a master at incorporating humor into his presentations. When he was introducing the iPhone, the new iPhone, he said, today we reintroduce the iPhone. And then this image comes on the stage and he starts laughing, the crowd starts laughing, and then he goes on with his presentation. Sometimes it can just be something so small and so quick, but it has a big impact. And sometimes you need those emotional, funny, lighthearted moments to break up some very serious topics. Sir Kenneth Robinson and his talk on schools kill creativity. I want to say it's 3 laughs a minute, but he has such a serious and powerful topic that you really get so much out of it, but you're laughing. You want to listen to him. When I think about my favorite presenters, they do incorporate a lot of humor.
Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated about how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Gillian and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. You couldn't concentrate, she was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s and ADHD hadn't been invented, at this point. So it wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak panel room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, their homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So he said, wait here, we'll be back, we won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick, she's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? He said, she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multimillionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down. Now,
so here he has a very serious message, just really making us think as educators about individualized education and recreating schools. But he says it in such a way that it's humorous. We can laugh and it lightens the mood. When students are laughing, they're learning. So laughter can be a very powerful way to engage your students. It's kind of like a sticky note on your brain. It's very richly engaged. Storytelling is another way to really sync your minds with your students and to engage them in a powerful way. Research has shown that by telling a story, you really are doing a brain-to-brain coupling. Studies have been shown where they've put electrodes on the person who is presenting and then also on the audience members and did a study. And as the presenter was telling the story, the same areas of the brain would light up for both. They then had the speaker present in a language that the audience didn't know and tell the same story, and there was no correlation. So that shows you how powerful incorporating stories into our classes, in the way we communicate. Stories are powerful. I think about the National Policy Seminar coming up in a few weeks. And when you're meeting with your policymakers, being able to tell stories, talk about the powerful stories of what's happening in your classes, how CTE is impacting the lives of students, that's a powerful tool to use in any setting. Brains that fire together, wire together. So it's something that there's science behind storytelling. There's a website called significantobjects.com that was an experiment to see if by telling stories, if you could increase the value of an object. So to change the subjective value to an objective value just by adding a story. So the folks who organized this experiment, they had some items that were donated, some that were up to $2.25 from thrift stores. On average, it was $1.25 a piece. And they then had writers write narrative about each object and then auctioned off the items on eBay. One of my favorites is a ceramic banana that was 50 cents that sold for $75 because of the narrative attached to it. That's powerful. That just shows how much of a difference having a story attached to something can make. And I think in CTE classes, really complementing what's happening, complementing academic areas with CTE, having our students write stories about what they're creating, whether they're making something in a class, doing an engineering project, in medicine, the health occupations, whatever area, connecting stories and teaching them how to connect those two is really powerful. Sometimes telling stories is a way of looking at things in a different way. This is a TED ad from The Guardian, and it shows how the Three Little Pigs, which is a story we all know, could be changed in modern day society if social media and the 24-hour news cycle was around at the time of the story. This is just a 3-minute clip that I want to share with you guys.
So the spotlight is once again shone on the grey area of homeowners' rights to protect their properties.
This isn't right. The three little pigs are the victims. They down 2 houses. We've got one.
But the pigs went too far. They have every right to defend their property.
Boiling someone alive hardly constitutes reason.
If he's got a big lion,
Yeah, protect yourself in your own home.
man's home is his castle.
Don't try
so I could burn my house down, I'd do the same.
I knew the wolf. There's no way you could have burned down those houses. He had asthma.
The wolf had asthma. So what's the truth about the pig's houses being blown down? Inside job.
There's no reason why those two houses, one made from straw, the other from wood, should have collapsed. Not even a healthy wolf's huff and puff could bring them down.
The three of the pigs have confessed to conspiring to commit insurance fraud, framing the wolf in an attempt to cover their tracks. Their motive was financial, as they struggled to keep up with their mortgage repayments.
I'm behind on my payments too. How has it happened? Lost everything.
I think with everything that's happening in our society right now, and just seeing the way that social media has really impacted everything from politics to just the way we interact with each other, this could be a powerful way to teach students how to tell stories. Have them watch this video, then even just thinking about different fairy tales that could have a different ending. And I've done this activity with students, and they get so creative. One of my favorite was a girl who decided that Peter Pan was a creeper. Or that Cinderella was really the bad guy. I mean, there's just so many different things that the kids come up with, and it helps them to get their creative juices flowing and think about stories and how to tell stories. As educators, we also have to tell our stories. We have so many people who are telling our stories for us, who are not educators, who do not know what's going on. And I think that being able to tell our stories and being able to put our stories together in a powerful way, and trusting in the fact that our stories matter. It matters not just to us, but to our students. That's important. I heard someone say recently that, but I'm just a teacher. They were asking me to talk to a policymaker for them. And I said, you need to contact them and tell them your story. And they said, I'm just a teacher. And that broke my heart. You know, teachers are the most important people. They're creating every other profession. So it's very important to be able to tell our stories and to be brave and bold in telling those stories. I ran across this the other day and had to incorporate it into this presentation. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. And as educators, just being advocates for what we believe in is very powerful. And I think that when we think about the power of our stories, it helps us to give more jaw-dropping, more dynamic presentations. Thou shalt not steal time. TED Talks are 18 minutes, and I mentioned earlier today that it's 18 minutes for a reason, that there's brain science behind it. And it's just natural as humans that after 18 minutes, we start, our brain starts to wander off. We start thinking about other things, no matter how interested we are in the material. It's kind of like if you're holding a 5-pound weight and it starts out very light, but the longer you hold it, the heavier it gets and you start to drift off. So when we are telling stories, when we're doing presentations, to be able to use different parts of the brain, because we all know that most of our presentations are not 18 minutes, they're much longer. John Medina says that when you're doing a presentation that's 50 minutes, 90 minutes, to break it up into segments, to think about what area of the brain the person is using and then incorporate other things. For CTE educators, that's easy for us because we're able to do a lot of hands-on activities, a lot of project-based learning. But when you're doing a presentation, maybe it is for a board or for another situation, think about how much time you're spending maybe on something that's analytical, then switch to something that's more narrative, or incorporate some humor, some strong imagery, or a video is another way of really breaking it up so that you can keep your audience engaged in what you're saying. Another area that John Medina talks about with presentations is novelty. How when something is introduced that is new, or it's a new perspective on something that you may already know, that novelty can really increase the engagement. And I apologize, my dogs are going a little crazy right now, so ignore the background noise. But for novelty, that's just something that we think about New Year's resolutions. It's February 13th, and we're less than 2 months into the new year. And I know for me, I was very excited about my New Year's resolutions, but as that novelty wore off, so did my commitment to keeping those New Year's resolutions. Research shows, by the way, just to go a little bit off track, that setting smaller goals, like 30-day goals or even week goals, is a much better strategy than a year of New Year's resolutions, because most people don't remember them. But when you get a new car, you're super excited about it, you're treating it like your baby, but the novelty wears off. So we constantly have to mix things up and find new ways to engage our audience. John Medina also talks about how novelty, the reason it works is because when something is new, it causes our brains to release dopamine. So just like when dopamine is released with addictions such as gambling, smoking, drinking, drugs, that same dopamine can be a very positive thing when it comes to learning. And we can get our students addicted to learning when we're constantly introducing new concepts or introducing them in a new way. It may be just switching up your routine in the classroom. If you always start off with a certain bell work, in a few days, switch it to something else. Keep your students guessing, keep your audience guessing on what's coming next so that they do stay engaged. Our brain doesn't pay attention to boring things. So if you as a presenter feel bored as you're presenting, your audience is feeling it 10 times as much. So make sure that what you're presenting is something that folks can really listen to, engage with, and that it's constantly new. Seth Godin did an excellent TED Talk, and he's a marketing guru. And he talks about how we have so much coming at us all the time, so much information, that the natural thing to do is tune out most of it and only focus on certain things. And an example he uses is when you're driving down the street and there's a dairy farm that you pass by every day, you don't even see the cows because you're so used to seeing them, you're focusing on other things. But one day you're driving down the street and the cows are purple. You're going to notice, it's going to stand out because it's different, it's remarkable, it's worthy of making a remark about. And he talks about too how if every day those cows are purple, the same thing's going to happen, that you're going to start tuning out again. So just keeping things new and engaging by switching things up is very important. It's a matter of constantly reiterating. And TED as an organization is an excellent example of this. They started out as a conference in California with about 800 attendees, and it was open only to certain people, and it was only around the topics of technology, entertainment, and design. When they realized it was time to change and open it up to a broader audience and to pretty much any topic out there, people really started getting involved, and the organization survived. There was a point where they thought the organization was going to go away because the interest was dwindling. They also tried having TED Talks on TV, and when the effect of that started wearing off, they switched to YouTube. But they're constantly finding new ideas to keep their organization fresh and keep it relevant. They recently started a new platform called Open TED, where you can upload your TED Talks. And then another one that you're able to send in your stories and have an anonymous story because it's too personal to share your story, but you think other people would benefit from it. And TED tells your story for you. How cool is that? Like, I think that's just an amazing tool for people to be able to share, learn from each other, but also protecting their identity in some cases, or it may be something that's very personal because of someone else involved and they want to protect the identity because of that. Pokemon, a couple years ago, people stopped paying attention to Pokemon after it had been very popular. And then in 2016, Pokemon Go was all the rage because they'd reinvented themselves. They found a new concept, and people are running into traffic, getting hit. I was at a conference and over the summer, and this kid was running around, and he looked confused. He looked like he was looking for something. And so I thought he was looking for his parents, and I stopped him and said, can I help you find your parents? And he looked a little embarrassed, and I realized he had his iPad. I'm like, oh, you're looking for Pokemon, aren't you? But now kids are already getting tired of it. Well, and some adults in some cases. And it's something that if they want to stay relevant, they'll have to continue to reinvent themselves as well. This is a 3-minute talk that really shows a novel approach to something as simple as our home. Don't build your home, grow it. And I highly recommend that you watch it at some point. I can send out the link if you're interested in watching it. But it's just, it shows different ways to grow our homes. It talks about sustainability. It's a short but powerful talk that is a completely new and novel concept. And then TED Talks end with a call to action. There's sometimes when someone may want to speak at a TED event and they have a subject and they want to complain about something or express their opinion. And that's not the point of a TED Talk. Every TED Talk has an idea worth spreading that can impact people. So even if it is talking about something that someone is upset about or doesn't agree about, it has a better idea, something that can make the world a better place, whether it's an invention, a new technology, or just a call to action for society and an impact on what's going on in the world around us. So what is the call to action? How do you want people to take what you've talked about and use it, continue thinking about it, explore new ideas, or actually take action on the subject area? My call to action today is that you continue to really explore and think about how you present, how you tell your stories, and just being dynamic in your presentation skills, but also thinking about your students and how you're incorporating presentation literacy into your subject areas so that your students know how to share their voice in an effective way. Our students have so many tools at their fingertips to share their ideas, whether it's Periscope, Facebook Live, YouTube, to share their ideas in a global level that we've never had before. So it's so critical. I think it may be one of the most important things that we can teach our students and incorporate into our CTE subject areas is how to be effective in presenting and how to share ideas in a responsible and effective way for our students. Here's my contact information again, but we have plenty of time and I would like to open up the floor for questions, or if you have ideas based upon what we've discussed today that you would like to share some ideas. I would love to talk about maybe what you're doing to make your presentations dynamic, or any ideas that may have come to mind based on this presentation, or questions that you may have. While you are thinking of questions, one thing that I do want to share with you, just so that if you are putting a PowerPoint together, I ran into something that happened today and I thought, this is something I should share with other people because I had no idea. I use PowerPoints all the time. And today, about 30 minutes before this presentation, I noticed that there was a little sign that was showing that my images were gone with a little red X. And I looked up to find out what was happening. And apparently, if you are working on a presentation out of Dropbox, then sometimes when it's pulling the information to save your information, it can cause you to lose images and you have to go back and redo your PowerPoint. So something just to keep in mind, always make sure that when you're creating images, creating PowerPoint, that you're using your hard drive, saving everything on the hard drive. You can then transfer it over into Dropbox or into another storage place. But just that's something you don't want to happen, especially if it happens right before you're delivering a presentation. And then another thing that I would like to share real quick too is embedding videos. I'm going to share my my slide again. Hold on one second. All right, so I was at a conference recently and they were asking me how to embed videos into their presentation. So I just want to show that to you real quick, because if you are using a TED Talk, and there's some amazing TED Talks that you can use, that you can download those from the website or from YouTube. But just a real quick show you how to do that is you create a slide. And once you have your slide, go into Insert. I'm going to switch to full screen real quick. And then go to video. And the video that you would have already downloaded from a file, if you go into, and I'm just going to do, but when you find your video, what you would do then is hit Insert for your video, And then I can show you through another slide here. Are you able to see the images that I'm doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. Sorry. Okay, going back. All right, so for your video, you could go to video format and then have a picture that you can put as the frame. And then for playback, have it set for automatic so that when you can have a picture ahead of time so you know what's coming next, but have it to where it starts automatically and plays on full screen. And it's just an easy way to make sure that you don't run into technical issues that could happen with when you're using a video in your presentations, because it really is nice sometimes to break it up depending upon the size of your audience and the information that you're doing. All right, any questions?
Rachel, we do have a question from Kathy.
Okay, great.
She's wondering how much time you put aside into preparing students for their talks. Do you have a particular format, or does that vary from student to student?
That is an excellent question. So right now I just started a TED Ed Club, which, are you familiar with TED Ed Clubs? Okay, it is an excellent tool that provides you all the resources that you need. If you go onto the TED Ed website, and I think it's just teded.com, you are able to, here, I'm going to stop this share real quick. Okay, if you go into the TED Ed website, you can request to start a TED Ed Club, and they have lessons that are already ready for you, and then resources that students can explore on their own. That's super helpful for preparing your students for public speaking. It usually is around 8 weeks with 1 hour a week, with the students having activities and exercises that they do outside of class, but it gives them a format and a way to prepare for a TED Talk, which is something they can apply to their CTO event competitions or any type of competitive event, which is super helpful. And then also, as far as your question about how much time I spend preparing the student, it really depends on the student. Some students want a lot of time. I have a student who I've worked with for, I guess it's going on 3 years now. And after his second year of learning public speaking, he did a competition for Educators Rising. He won at the state level for creative lecture, which is basically a TED Talk, but it's not a formal TED Talk. He went on to nationals, won first place, and they were so blown away with his talk that they invited him to be a part of the closing ceremony and speak at the closing ceremony. He did an amazing job there. And so I'm working with him now. We're actually meeting on Friday to practice a new talk that he's doing. He's going to be presenting at the Nebraska State Conference in a couple weeks. And we're also hoping that he will be, maybe we're talking to Michael Connett about the Vision Conference to maybe have him as one of the Ed Talk speakers as well. So some students want more. They're very excited about it, and they want everything you'll give them. So it really depends on the individual student.
Right. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And I'm just reading your question now. As far as the format, I think that using the TED Ed Clubs is a great format to do. Up until now, I've always done just stuff that I've researched and put together myself. It was formal from what I put together, but not something based on anything else other than what I've learned from studying TED Talks. Anything else? All right. Well, Kate, do you want to close the floor, or what's the next step?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was an awesome presentation. And thank you, Kathy and John, for joining us. I know it's after the workday if you're on the East Coast, so thank you for taking the time. We will post the recording once it's available, probably sometime later this week, back on our website. So you can go back and view it, and please do share it with your friends because this is a great talk. So thank you again, Rachel.
All right. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone. Bye.